I'm Lauren Kriegel. I will be your host and presenting with my colleague Brittany Fols throughout this webinar series. Welcome to the first session of our CAR-T webinar, Caring for a Loved One Undergoing CAR-T Cell Therapy, hosted by Cancer Support Community. Our CAR-T webinar series is designed to offer information and address the concerns and emotions of those caring for a loved one undergoing CAR-T cell therapy. The series will include 3 sessions featuring leading healthcare providers specializing in CAR-T cell therapy. Today, during our first session entitled Push the Pause Button, Sustaining Compassionate Care, we'll discuss practical tips to help cope with the social and emotional challenges of going through CAR-T, including how to balance care for others with self-care. We'll discuss self-care strategies like mindfulness and how to focus on values. Next week, we'll be talking about living with uncertainty, and in our third session, we'll have a CAR-T advanced practice nurse join us to discuss the caregiver role in monitoring for side effects of CAR-T. So you definitely don't want to miss those. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. We're talking about how each of you individually can learn to push the pause button. So we will be asking you to participate along the way through polls, reflections, and it will be handy to have a pen and paper nearby. So if you don't have pen and paper near you, go ahead and take a moment to grab some while we're doing our housekeeping and introductions, because we'll need a pen and paper a little bit later. My colleague Brittany and I will be sharing in the presenting, so you don't have to listen to just my voice the whole time. I want to take a moment to introduce Brittany Fols. Brittany is a licensed clinical social worker, starting her career as a mental health therapist, and has spent the last several years of her career as an oncology social worker, providing psychosocial support and connection to resources to families through their cancer experience. Before we start, I'll go over some reminders and housekeeping items. If you need technical assistance during the webinar, please email outreach@cancersupportcommunity.org. To listen using your telephone, you can dial in using the numbers you see under audio. Of course, you can always listen right through your computer or tablet. Today's session is being recorded and it will be available on our website at cancersupportcommunity.org/CAR-T on Thursday, October 14th. If you're listening to us live on October 7th, 2021 and would like to ask a question, please click on Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You will then be able to type your question into the box. You can submit a question at any time during the session, but please know that we've allowed for a designated amount of time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions and to have some discussion. At the end of the webinar, we have an evaluation survey that only takes a couple minutes and can give us valuable input to improve future webinars. So we hope you'll take that survey at the end of the program. Brittany and I have no financial disclosures to report today. For those of you who are new to Cancer Support Community programming, welcome. As the largest professionally led nonprofit network of cancer support worldwide, the Cancer Support Community, also known as CSC, including its Gilda's Club affiliates, is dedicated to ensuring that all people impacted by cancer are empowered by knowledge, strengthened by action, and sustained by community. CSC achieves this mission through 3 areas: direct service delivery, research, and advocacy. The organization includes an international network of affiliates that offer the highest quality social and emotional support for people impacted by cancer, as well as a community of support available online and over the phone. I'm now going to turn things over to my colleague, Brittany, to get us going.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany. Now that we have gotten a chance to get through the introductions and housekeeping for today, it's time to jump into our topic. We wouldn't be doing a good job with a presentation called Push the Pause if we didn't take moments throughout to push pause. I'd like to start by just taking a few minutes for us to all privately think about a specific time in your life when life might have felt difficult to manage. It could be a recent event that you experienced, something from the past, whatever it might be. Just take some time to think about what that experience was. How did you react? What did you notice, maybe physically, emotionally, spiritually during that experience? Now I'll give you a moment to think about that. Now, let's imagine that instead of our actual reaction during that experience, you decided to pause, just pause. Stillness can allow us to gain clarity and manage our thoughts and feelings before reacting. For the next hour, we're going to spend time discussing some of the challenges one may face when a loved one is going through a rigorous treatment course like CAR T-cell therapy, and some tips to help push pause in the moment when we need it most. So I want to just have a few minutes just to talk about the topics that we're going to cover today during this webinar. We're going to start by going through change in cancer. We'll then go into common challenges and worries, followed by mental health and cancer. Then we will go into our push pause, a mindfulness activity, cancer support resources, and then we will end our session for today with a Q&A. So CAR T and cancer can affect many areas of our lives. In this webinar, we're going to focus on 3 areas that can be greatly impacted as a caregiver. You may already be aware of the areas in your life that have been impacted by your loved one undergoing CAR T-cell therapy, but it's important that we acknowledge them today to provide you with practical tools in coping with any challenges you may be facing as a caregiver. So we'll start with the first area of change, the emotional changes. When a loved one receives a cancer diagnosis, it can lead to many different emotions, such as feeling nervous, anxious, worried. Maybe you noticed yourself feeling overwhelmed or frustrated, maybe had a sense of sadness or depression, a loss of connection, and we can go on, right? These are many emotions that can change over time, but can often become very distressing. And when a loved one is undergoing a rigorous course of treatment like CAR T-cell therapy, these emotions can certainly be exacerbated. So our second area of change is our spiritual changes. When a loved one receives a cancer diagnosis and has been through extensive treatment, it can lead us to wanting to maybe reprioritize our goals and values, finding or questioning meaning or purpose, maybe spending some time reflecting on our beliefs and examining what really might matter to you. And our last area of change is the physical changes. As a caregiver, you may notice that your role as a support person can incorporate many hats. Now, I only have a couple bubbles here, but these are just, to give some examples, and I'm sure you can think of maybe 100 more. But as you could be a care coordinator, an advocate, a personal chef, maybe the transportation provider to all the appointments. And with all of these hats, it can often lead to less self-care for yourself. Maybe you're not eating as well as you once were because you're worried about making sure your loved one gets the nutrition that they need. Maybe you haven't been to the doctor for yourself in a while to follow up on your own medical care needs. Maybe you're noticing an extreme sense of fatigue and exhaustion, and you're not getting the adequate rest for yourself. These are just a few ways your life can be impacted by a loved one going through CAR T. So I'd like to start today with a poll. So I'd like to ask your participation, and we're going to have the poll pop up in just a second. I'd like to know, what are you most worried about today? And I'll give you a little bit of time to think that through and pick your answer. Okay, so let's see where the most concerns were for today. It looks like 56% of you shared that you're worried about the future and what lies ahead, followed by your loved one's cancer progressing or returning. And then we're tied for exercise and nutrition and your loved one's mood and behavior. So let's see how your answers for today compare to our Cancer Experience Registry survey that was administered and completed by our Research and Training Institute in 2020. So our Research and Training Institute conducted a Cancer Experience Registry survey for caregivers. Of those caregivers that responded to the survey, 71% expressed worry about their loved one's cancer progressing or coming back, and 67% expressed worry about the future and what lies ahead. So sounds like it's pretty comparative to the responses from today's poll as well. And thank you for your participation in that. So these surveys were not specific to caregivers of those going through CAR T cell therapy, but rather any cancer diagnosis and someone acting as a caregiver. So while we may not wish to acknowledge it, uncertainty is a natural and unavoidable part of life. Very little about our lives is constant or totally certain, and life can change very quickly and very unpredictably. Next week, as Lauren had shared, we will be taking a deeper dive into living with uncertainty, and we'll be spending a lot of time on these major concerns, so stay tuned for that. Just to add to the results of the survey, here are the top 10 responses that our 2020 caregiver participants identified as what they were most concerned about. In the interest of time for today with our webinar, we won't read through all of them, but I will highlight a few of them in our next slide. So Lauren, can you just click through one more time? Thank you. So the quality of life and distress areas were some of the most significant reported concerns. So 49% of caregivers reported substantially worse anxiety than the national average. 34% reported substantially worse fatigue than the national average, and 39% said their health was somewhat or much worse than before they began their caregiver role. So these are pretty significant numbers, and that is why we are doing this webinar today, to really highlight how impactful going through a course of treatment like CAR T-cell therapy can have on both the individual diagnosed as well as the caregiver. And we're here to try to support you with some tools to get through. So just to add to the common worries and concerns as caregivers, some highlights here. You might have been unexpectedly kind of thrust into this position as a caregiver with little preparation. Maybe you found yourself performing caregiver tasks alone. I know with COVID, this has been even more significant of an issue because there's limited additional supports that might be able to participate in someone's treatment or may be able to travel with your loved one. You might be fearing that you might lose this person in your life that's going through CAR T-cell therapy. And you're juggling on top of that caregiver duties that also, are not to be without noticing the daily activities that you have to attend to. And maybe you're still working, or you have children also to take care of, and bills, and we can go on, but that can lead to some feelings of inadequacy and stress. So our goal today is to highlight a few of these many common worries, and we're going to turn it over to Lauren, who will spend some time discussing signs and symptoms to look out for.
So I'm sure you all know that mental health and physical health are interrelated. And when there's a significant stressor on you or your loved one's physical well being, it can cause a myriad of mental health concerns, including distress, anxiety, and depression. So we're going to talk about each of these just briefly before discussing what can be done to help alleviate them. So we'll start with distress. Distress is defined as extreme anxiety, sorrow, or pain, right? And research has found that patients and caregivers exhibit interdependence when it comes to distress. So when a patient's well-being can directly impact a caregiver's well-being and vice versa. And most caregivers, about 52%, have reported that they spend more than 8 hours a day caring for the patient. And this can be even higher with CAR T cell, right? Monitoring for those side effects, like we're going to talk about in our third session. There's predictable stress points along the process. So, diagnosis, treatment decision making, CAR T infusion, and then follow up and waiting to see if the CAR T cell therapy is doing its job. And of course, the consequences of stress are many, right? So you may notice a change in your quality of life, sadness, worry, physical illness, feeling isolated, physical issues with weight or sleep. And, going through CAR T can cause these types of distress or make them more pronounced. So I just want you to take a look at this list and maybe make a mental note of something on this list that's been prominent for you, kind of an area where you want to feel some positive change. So when talking about anxiety, about 49% of caregivers have reported anxiety levels substantially worse than the national average, right? Caregiving is an extra layer of stress and worry. Caregivers with anxiety can have physical and emotional symptoms. Emotionally, you may feel tense, worried, agitated, distracted. Physically, you may tremble, sweat, you may be short of breath, feel your heart pounding, have trouble with sleeping or headaches. But it's important to note that anxiety and fear are common reactions to a stressful event like cancer and an involved treatment like CAR T cell therapy. And especially, when a therapy is newer, certainly not brand new, it's been around for years at this point, but when it's newer, that can also produce anxiety. And we need to get better at openly discussing our struggles and challenges. So, Brittany and I are going to be talking about some concrete tools to help ease symptoms of anxiety. Similarly, for depression, 34% of caregivers reported fatigue and depression levels that were substantially worse than national average. And when talking about depression, our reports show that, the signs and symptoms of depression can include sleeping too much or not enough, lack of interest in activities you used to enjoy, and a sense of withdrawal. So, some amount of anxiety and depression is to be expected under the circumstances, but we always want you to be on the lookout for signs that it's affecting you too much. So, if you notice severe worry or sadness, worry or sadness that's occurring most of the day for most days of the week, or when your worry or sadness is getting in the way of you doing the things you need and want to do. So, if it's getting in the way of you being able to be the caregiver that your loved one needs, if it's getting in the way of you addressing your own health concerns, we encourage you to contact a healthcare provider for referral to a specialist. And this can be your own primary care physician. You can talk with someone on the CAR T team and just make sure you get the support you need. So, of course, we're going to take a moment to pause, as is our goal here. And I want you to think about a time in the past when you were worried about something. And it doesn't have to be something as significant as cancer or CAR T cell therapy, just a time maybe you had a decision to make, you were stressed about it. And the reason I want you to go back and think about this, I used to have a poster in my office that said, so far you've survived 100% of your worst days, you're doing great. And it was meant to remind us that no matter what has happened in our lives, we have found a way to put one foot in front of the other and get through it. And it may not always be smooth and it may not always look pretty, but somehow you figured out a way to get through things. And so I just want you to think back on a time that was worrisome to you and think about, how did you get through it? What tool did you already have in your toolbox?
The 2Ds, depleters and derailers. So I love this picture because I feel like it can really just symbolize so many different areas of concern that might come up for us. But things like multitasking, negative people, negative thoughts, negative situations, competing demands, they can all lead to caregiver distress and burnout. And when we use up all of our energy without refilling our tank, it can leave us on empty. So what can we do to refuel and replenish our tank as a caregiver? So I'm going to start us off today talking about some tools that we can add to our emotional first aid kit. So when trying to balance caring for yourself and a loved one going through CAR-T, it's critical to know some tools to help combat the emotional, physical, and spiritual toll caregiving can have on your life by pushing pause, even for a brief moment or two in your day. So I have 6 different areas here: relaxation training, active coping, reframing thoughts, maximizing social support, acceptance and mindfulness, and setting an intention for self-care. So I want to take a minute just to go through some different examples for each of these. And the examples that I utilize today are just some ideas to kind of get some thoughts going for yourself as to what might be helpful for you. And that can change every day. Depending on what your day looks like, because life can be pretty unpredictable when someone's going through CAR T-cell therapy. So one way that we can start is by starting a morning routine for you, just for you. It could be 5 minutes, maybe just to make yourself a cup of coffee and sip it by yourself, maybe in your favorite chair, or you're by the window, just to get some light into the morning. Whatever it might be, wherever it might be, just setting that morning routine for yourself for however long you might have. It could be even less than 5 minutes, but it's just that way of starting your day intentionally to relax and to give yourself an opportunity to set and push pause. Another example that could be helpful is prioritizing the day by writing down what is most important for you to accomplish that day. So I do this all the time. I find that even just crossing one thing off my to-do list can really help me feel less overwhelmed. And there's something very therapeutic about seeing that line crossed out. So even if you can't get through the whole day of what you'd like to accomplish, just having a couple of them being able to be crossed off can really make a difference, and can really help you to push pause there and say, okay, I was able to get this, and this done. Maybe tomorrow I'll work on what I didn't. Another area that might be helpful for you is reframing thoughts. So reframing thoughts, when we talk about that, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to reframe something, a thought, to be positive, right? I think that's sometimes we can get caught up in trying to make everything positive, and that's not the case here. Because we know how difficult this can be for all of you that are involved here. And so we want to look at maybe neutralizing the thought. This can help to alleviate some increased feelings of distress. So for example, if you might be thinking to yourself, what if this CAR T-cell therapy won't work for my loved one? Well, that's a very valid thought, right? What if we change that though to, while we don't know if CAR T cell therapy will work for my loved one, we are doing everything we can to follow the treatment course, keep on top of appointments, and work with our oncology team to do everything we can. So as we can see there, it doesn't necessarily make it a positive reframing thought, but it's something that we can utilize to give it a little bit less emotion. Maximizing social support. So this can be really helpful, especially when you're the primary caregiver and doing this independently, maybe calling a close friend or family member, or if you have a clergy member that you find to be supportive. There's also an extensive opportunity to join a support group or a peer mentorship opportunity out in the cancer support communities to enhance some social support. And in just a couple of minutes, we're going to actually have an opportunity to practice a mindfulness exercise with Lauren. So stay tuned for that. And the last example that I'd like to share with you guys for today is to set an intention of self-care. So if you're noticing that you're feeling overwhelmed, or emotions are running high, or physically maybe you're just not feeling your best that day, sometimes just changing scenery can really help to alleviate some distressing thoughts, or just to give your body a chance to regroup. If walking into another room isn't an option, maybe stepping outside just to get some fresh air, even if it's for 30 seconds, this will allow you to recenter and pause before you have to go about your day.
Thanks, Brittany. I really like what you were saying about reframing thoughts to be neutral. I think sometimes people think, if the thought is, what if CAR T cell therapy doesn't work, that in order to reframe that, I have to, CAR T cell therapy is going to be great and it's going to be the answer in this, and that doesn't always feel authentic. So I really like the idea of neutralizing thoughts. So I'm going to take a minute to talk to you about mindfulness, and we're going to do a little experiential practicing as well. Before I do that, for any of you who may have just heard the word mindfulness and said, oh no, somebody else is going to tell me to meditate, I'm actually not going to tell you to meditate. Now, nothing against meditation. If you can meditate, if you do, it's wonderful. There is a plethora of research to support the benefits of meditation. But I don't know about all of you. I find the idea of meditation, kind of quieting the mind, emptying the mind, I find it very overwhelming. I am one of those people that is constantly in my to-do list. What's next? What's next? My brain is always going a mile a minute. And so the reason I really like mindfulness is because mindfulness is not actually asking you to empty your mind. It's asking you to focus your mind on just what you're experiencing right now. And one of the easiest ways to do that, one of my favorite ways to introduce mindfulness to someone who hasn't tried it before, is with sensory mindfulness, right? So we all learned about our five senses when we were young: sight, taste, touch, smell, and sound. And the idea is that you would pick one of those senses and stimulate it in some way, and then be fully present in that experience. So I love Brittany's idea of taking a couple minutes just to have a cup of coffee. That's a sensory experience, right? Just take a minute to hold the mug in your hand and feel the warmth. Take a deep breath and really smell the coffee. And hold that first sip in your mouth and really taste it. And you don't have to drink the whole cup that way, right? Because that would take an hour to drink a cup of coffee. But even if you just took a moment for that first sip to be a mindful activity. And the other reason I really love mindfulness is there's no time commitment needed, right? So sometimes when we think of meditating, we think of, find a quiet spot, set aside 15 minutes. And again, when you are busy with those caregiving responsibilities, that can just feel like another thing on your list. Mindfulness can be done anywhere at any time. So if you don't have extra time to add into your day, then I just encourage you to make things you're already doing into mindful experiences. What if every time you went to wash your hands, right? We're all washing our hands a lot now. What if every time you went to wash your hands, You just stopped to pay attention to, what does the water feel like? What does it sound like as it hits the sink? What does the soap smell like? What do the bubbles look like as they pop? You're just taking 30 seconds, 60 seconds to quiet all those racing thoughts and focus on an experience. One of my favorite mindfulness tricks, especially if you're having like a super stressful mind racing moment, is to take a small ice cube, even just a little chip of ice, and melt it in the palm of your hand, right? It's not cold enough to hurt you, but it's cold enough to draw your focus. And while that ice is sitting in the palm of your hand, you're paying attention to, not only does it feel cold, but it's starting to slide around. Now I see a puddle, it's dripping through my fingers, right? The cold will force the focus, and it just kind of quiets all that other noise. Another way that I love to do sensory mindfulness is with sounds. So if you're a music lover, if you have a favorite song and you know all the words already, see if you can listen and pick up the instruments that are playing in the background. What instruments do you hear? If it's a song you've never heard before, see if you can really pick up on every word in the lyrics, right? Like, what story are they telling? And there's also some great environmental sounds. So there's a lot of apps that can help with this, certainly apps like Calm, Headspace, Insight Timer. But one of my personal favorites is called Relax Melodies, and it allows you to layer different sounds. It's a free app. And my favorite combination is like a gentle piano music with crashing waves. I'm a beach person. That's my happy place. But they have rain falling, crickets, birds, all kinds of things. And you can layer the sounds. You can set a timer so that it'll play for a certain amount of time. And while you're listening to those sounds, you're going to try to be fully present in the experience. So we're going to take a moment now. And for the sake of time, I'm only going to do this, very briefly, but certainly if you had a couple of minutes before bed to, play your sounds. And so I'm going to force you all to go to my happy place, which is the beach, and I will lead us in a little sensory mindfulness. If you're comfortable, I'll ask you to close your eyes. I want you to think about your favorite beach. Think about the last time you got to go there. What did it feel like when you sunk your toes into the sand? What did the sun feel like beating down on your skin? Could you hear birds? Did you feel a breeze? I wish we had time to do more, but you get the idea. The idea is that you use the sound to stimulate the sense, and then you use all your other senses to try and be present in that moment. So we're going to talk about, mindfulness is a great way to push the pause button, but it's far from the only way. So if mindfulness resonates with you, fantastic. And I am going to ask all of you to try and incorporate a moment or two of mindfulness into each day. Just see, if it's not hand washing or listening to sounds, maybe you take a moment at the end of your shower to just, make the water a little warmer, have that sensory experience. And then those of you that are coming back with us next week, we can kind of talk about how it goes. So other ways to push the pause button. So there's a process for finding what works for you. The process includes assessing needs and values, creating simple goals, identifying activities that resonate with you, and then evaluating whether or not it's working. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to lead you through this step by step. We're going to assess values. So on the screen now, you'll see a list of core values. And I have to say, this is just a small sample of a list. There are lists that have as many as 100 values on them. This list has, I believe, 51 to be exact. And I want you to just take a look at the list. This is where you're going to need your pen and paper. I'm going to give you, about 30 seconds or so. Don't worry, it's more time than you think, to look through the list and choose 5 that really resonate with you. And I know this can be challenging because all of these values may speak to you in some way, right? They're all certainly things we want to strive towards. But what are the 5 that resonate with you? What are the 5 that feel the most important to you? Is it authenticity, community, family, faith, health, happiness, peace, wisdom? What are the ones that really resonate with you? I'll give you a few seconds to get your top 5. Okay, I hope you have your top 5 because now I'm going to be really mean and I'm going to make you cross out 2 to get to your top 3. Okay, so I know that all 5 spoke to you, but if you had to cross out 2 to get your top 3, go ahead and cross out 2. And now I'm going to ask you to cross out 1 to get to your top 2. I think you see where I'm going with this. And I won't force you to, but if I made you cross out 1 more, just leaving your number 1 value, what would that value be? And whatever that value is, whatever that word is, I want you to circle it and I want you to remember it. Whenever you are faced with a tough decision, I want you to ask yourself, how do these choices support or detract from this value? So I'll give you an example. As a caregiver, your to-do list is never ending. And let's say you get to the end of a very long day. There's a load of laundry that needs to go in. There's dishes that need to be unloaded from the dishwasher, and you're feeling exhausted and want a moment to relax. Just don't have time for it all. If your guiding value, if the thing that is the most, important to you is responsibility, well, then maybe doing the laundry and the dishes will make you feel accomplished and it'll make you feel like you did what you needed to do. You were responsible and you feel good about that. That's fantastic. If your value is health or peace or happiness, maybe you spend that little bit of time you have doing a self-care activity, right? But knowing your value word can help you make choices along the way. So setting an intention for self-care. Sometimes it can be hard to even know where to start. What do I do for self-care? What does that even mean? So a great tool is to ask yourself, what's something I used to like to do? I'm going to give you an example for myself, but you can obviously go through this with your own answers. Something I used to like to do. I used to like to take dance classes, all kinds of dance classes, ballet, hip hop, all different kinds. Can I incorporate it back into my life? Well, if I'm a CAR-T caregiver, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. I can't make a commitment to be at a dance class every Monday night at 7. I have no idea what Monday is going to look like, right? Do I need to do it differently? Be creative. Well, you know what? I'm pretty sure if I went on YouTube and searched 20-minute beginner ballet class, there would be no short of 1,000 results. What might get in the way? I don't have a dance studio in my house. How will I overcome this? I never use my dining room. Maybe I could push the table to the side, right? Like just really thinking through how can I make this accessible? Now, I just want to give you, the next slide is blurry. I don't expect you to read it, but I just want to give you an example that there is an endless list of possibilities for self-care. This is called the big list of pleasurable activities. It comes to us from DBT. DBT is a behavioral therapy that encourages small changes with a focus on mindfulness and self-care. I'm just going to read out a few examples, but this list is meant to show you that it can be something very small, right? Take a walk, call a friend, listen to the radio, play with the dog, get a haircut, rest, eat a piece of chocolate, you know, go online, anything that makes you happy. Um, you know, watching a favorite comedian if that makes you laugh. There's no shortage of things you can do that are accessible to you at all times. And I highly encourage you to write a few of these down on a piece of paper, because sometimes when we get stressed out, we don't even know where to start. And sometimes having that visual reminder can be great. So I want to go back to that process for a minute and just remind everybody that now you have all the tools you need. So you now know what your most important and guiding value is, right? A simple goal could be as easy as 5 minutes of self-care a day, or practicing self-care, every time I drink a cup of coffee or I take a shower. You now have a list of pleasurable activities to choose from, and you're going to try one. If it helps, great, do it again. If it doesn't help, no problem. Throw it out, try a different one next time. And this is going to look different for everyone, right? There's no one answer that fits all people. The key is thinking about what works for you and committing to it. Maybe it's self-care, maybe it's starting a new hobby, maybe it's spending more time with friends and family. Maybe you take your value word and you post it, you put it on your bathroom mirror so that you see it every morning and you're reminded of your guiding value. Maybe you take that list of pleasurable activities and put that inside a kitchen cabinet, right? It doesn't have to be out where everybody sees it, but it's somewhere where you can access it. It's also very helpful to have a list of trusted people that you can reach out to. So a friend, a clergy person, a mental health professional, someone on the medical team. I highly recommend getting connected to the oncology social worker at your CAR-T center. Sometimes our fears may be unfounded. Sometimes our brains kind of run away, and just talking to someone can help clear things up. I want to take a minute to talk about resources that are available to you. So on this screen, you'll see some of the resources we provide at the cancer support community. We have our cancer support helpline, which is staffed by community navigators and resource specialists, and translation is available. My Lifeline is an online platform with features like a helping calendar, personal blogs, and discussion boards, including a discussion board dedicated to CAR-T and immunotherapy, as well as a discussion board dedicated to caregivers. So I highly encourage you all to join My Lifeline to get connected with others. We also have our Frankly Speaking About Cancer program, which this webinar is a part of. Frankly Speaking provides trusted information on a variety of topics. Information is available print and digital, and for a complete list of what we offer, you can go to orders.cancersupportcommunity.org. You can always find more information by visiting our website, and we also have some specific resources for CAR-T. So we have a CAR-T patient and caregiver guide. This is a fantastic tool that's available to you, as well as other dedicated CAR-T resources. So you can visit cancersupportcommunity.org/CAR-T. So we'd now like to open up to our live audience for questions and discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to answer as many questions and have discussion. We look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, Lauren and Brittany. This is Rachel. I'm going to ask you a question while we wait for some other questions to come in, if you don't mind. In your experience working with your oncology patients in the community, can you tell us or give us some examples about what some other mindfulness activities that they did or they found useful, and or that their caregivers did as well?
Sure, I'd be happy to share one, Brittany, if you don't mind. I had taught a patient, he was a bone marrow transplant patient. I had taught him the ice cube trick, the kind of like, shocking your system with a little bit of cold to just kind of stop the anxious thoughts. And he had translated it in a way that I always found so interesting. And it just illustrates how you can really use it anywhere. So he had been in a grocery store, and there were people in the aisle with him, and they were arguing with each other. And I don't remember what they were arguing about. I don't think he would either, but it kind of triggered him because it was a very petty argument. And in his brain, he was thinking, that's your biggest problem. Like, I'm going through all this stuff. And he got very anxious. And he felt like he was almost ready to kind of just flee the grocery cart and leave the store. And instead, he went to the frozen aisle and he picked up a pint of ice cream. And he, to anybody else, it looked like he was like reading the ingredients. But he said, Lauren, I was paying attention to the cold in my hand, the shape of the container, the whole thing right there in the middle of the grocery store.
Wow, thank you. Brittany, did you have anything, or should I go on to the next question?
Thank you, Lauren. That was a great example. I do have one that I'm thinking about when I had a patient that was undergoing radiation therapy. They were highly distressed, undergoing the actual radiation treatment themselves. And so what we did was set up their favorite playlist of music, and they were able to walk into the room with their favorite music playing to try to help center them. And then when they were on the table, the music would shift to the next song on the playlist so that they were able to get through. And then before they knew it, they knew exactly what song was going to be the last one before they finished. And it was something that they were able to focus on through the course of their treatment each day.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
So here's a question. One of our participants is asking if there is an app that we can use to do mindfulness because she's not sure if she would know how to keep it going.
Sure. So there's quite a few actually. There are the app that I use for the sounds is Relax Melodies. And again, you can layer whatever sounds are good for you. There's also apps like Headspace, Insight Timer, Calm, Sanvello, I believe. And they all do things like guided imagery, guided relaxation. So those would all be helpful tools.
And
Thank you.
I just want to add that if someone does not have a smartphone to be able to incorporate those apps, YouTube is a great resource. There's so many free mindfulness activities and guided mindfulness meditation opportunities that you can find, and they can vary from a minute long to an hour plus. So I think there's a lot of ways to access mindfulness activities aside from apps.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Brittany, because I couldn't get Relax Melodies to play through our Zoom today. So I actually used a YouTube video of ocean sounds. So thank you for bringing that.
Another participant has a question. Do you have an idea of how we can encourage other family members to help?
I can take this. Well, I think it will vary as to the family dynamics and the situation at hand, but the most important way is to communicate the need. So sometimes family members or friends may not be aware that you're in need of help. And so starting that conversation, if it feels comfortable to practice it before actually initiating the conversation, that can be really helpful. But the actual act of saying, hey, I need some help, and maybe giving them some ideas of what can be helpful, like making meals or maybe taking some of the appointments to drive your loved one to those appointments.
And Brittany, if I can jump in, all of those things are a great thing that can be put on the helping calendar in my Lifeline. So, as Brittany's saying, things like, you can set up a calendar that says on Monday, I need a meal delivered. On Wednesday, I need someone to drive, my loved one to an appointment. And on Friday, we need somebody to come and sit and watch a movie with us, right?
Mhm.
Just any little thing that would help. And the reason I like the online helping calendar so much is it takes away that awkward ask. I think sometimes it's hard for caregivers to ask face to face because they feel like, oh, well, my friend or whatever, they're going to feel obligated to say yes, right? But if you just send out the calendar, then people can sign up for what they can do and what works for them.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Okay. One of our participants is asking and saying, I'm struggling to manage my caregiving duties with my work responsibilities. How do I tell my coworkers that I am doing the best I can do without them thinking I can't still do my job?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think, like Brittany was talking about communication, and I think that's important with coworkers too. Not everybody is going to get it. That, the unfortunate part is until you have been in the caregiver shoes, it's really sometimes difficult to understand what it truly entails. And so I think, just being honest and saying, I am balancing my work role and my caregiver role, and I am doing my self care so that I can bring my best self to both. And not every day is going to be perfect.
Thank you. And one last question for you both. So, with the COVID pandemic, it's been that much harder, besides getting treatment and being a caregiver, to hit the pause button because of all the other stressors going on. So, if we hit the pause button, sometimes it feels difficult to um, that something else is coming up and then we have to hit it again and we have to hit it again. So, what would your advice be to patients and caregivers with all the other stressors going on and how to combat that?
Yeah, so that's why I kind of talk about mindfulness so passionately because you can literally do it anywhere. You can be mindful in the car. In fact, none of us drive very mindfully and it's a little frightening, right? Did you ever like get home and think, oh my God, I hope all the lights were green because I don't remember seeing any of them? I think we're all a little guilty of that. If you were driving mindfully, not only would you have seen the green lights, you would have paid attention to what the steering wheel feels like in your hand, what the engine sounds like when you accelerate. Like literally, you don't have to add any extra time. You can push pause by when you use the restroom and you wash your hands, when you take a sip of water, when you're driving in the car, when you're taking your shower. And you may need to pause frequently throughout the day, right? You're absolutely right that there's a whole nother layer of stressors on all of us right now. And so that makes adding in those tiny little moments even more important.
Yeah, and I'll just add I love the five senses tool that Lauren shared with us today in the webinar because with us being relatively isolated with the pandemic, we have to access more of what's around us, right? We're a little bit more limited in what might be available to utilize in terms of scenery or activities. And so having the ability to focus on what we have right in front of us or as part of our body can really help just to recenter and refocus, even if it's for those brief seconds, like Lauren was saying.
Great, thank you. Well, Brittany and Lauren, that is the end of our questions. So, we will turn it back to you to wrap it up.
Thank you. Yes, and Cancer Support Community would like to thank our generous sponsors for this program, Kite, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Novartis. We want to thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time and participation. Please take a moment to complete our webinar evaluation survey, which will pop up next if you're with us live. If you're listening to a recording of this webinar, you can access the evaluation survey by going to the website listed on the slide. And we greatly appreciate any feedback you may have. And I can't let you go before I say, don't forget to join us next week. We'll be discussing living with uncertainty. We'll have more information, tools, and tips. We thank you for your participation and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.